I welcome you all. I welcome you all for a very insightful and engaging book release on the book Echo Echo. We have among us Kalpana Swaminathan ma'am, an acclaimed Indian writer based in Mumbai. Kalpana ma'am is recognized for her compelling narratives. She, along with Ishrat Syed sir, also the co-author of today's book release book, Thank you for your patience, everyone. We begin our second session of the day at Gomti Book Fest 2023. We welcome our guests and our authors here. We have a very special book announcement. The name of the book, as you can see, a very attractive cover, Bahadur, Shah of Gujarat. So we delve into the 16th century and mysteries and histories with Kalpana Swaminathan ma'am and Ishrat Syed sir. They will unravel the layers of this compelling narrative with us. Let me tell you that Kalpana ma'am is an acclaimed Indian writer based in Mumbai. She's recognized for her compelling narratives. She, along with Ishrat Syed sir, is the co-author of a book under the common pen name Kalpish Ratna. Kalpana Swaminathan ma'am has previously been honored with the 2009 Vodafone Crossword Book Award fiction for Venus Crossing, 12 Stories of Transit. We have Ishrat Syed sir, a trained general and pediatric surgeon from Grant Medical College, Mumbai. We are honored to have you here, and we welcome you both on the stage to grace this dais as we begin the discussion.
Good evening. We are delighted and deeply honored to be here on the banks of the Gomti. And having heard Gauri introduce us, I think you know all about us already. So why don't we go straight into the book and let you meet Bahadur.
Before we start with Bahadur, let me just tell you that we are sitting here, both of us, as authors. But our first profession is as surgeons. Okay? So we tend to use the scalpel to do surgery, and we hope that we use our pens also as a scalpel to cut through the nonsense, to write sense back on the page. Okay? So from that peak, from the peak of one historic event, what can we see of the past? Is it a flash of light on the horizon?
An historic event. What does the term even mean? Can you preserve that event as a time capsule, as a museum piece? But time cannot be captured. It flows. It keeps changing its narrative.
And how does that narrative change?
What are the distortions of history?
Whose vision do we read and whose memory?
Who is telling the story?
The Ranas had metal mirrors.
The Dakshin Rajas had obsidian mirrors.
The Qizilbashis had mirrors of glass. Yes, but they were flawed and they made a monster of a delicate face.
But he, Shah of Gujarat, he had purchased at the value of 3 elephants a Firangi mirror that reflected not just his features, but every flicker of muscle beneath his taut, opalescent skin.
No narrative can be entirely objective. The image in the mirror is always virtual. Now, if you look at the way I have spelled Bahadur, you see that the R is reversed. You must be wondering why the R is reversed. You often, when you look in the mirror, you don't see your exact face, you see it laterally inverted. So, by reversing the R of Bahadur, I'm trying to show you that there is a duality to Bahadur. It is not a straight narrative. There is something which is not visible at first glance. So, when you read a history, not this history, but when you read a history and you encounter Bahadur, you will not see the Bahadur you encounter in this book, because the image will always be virtual. And that history has condemned Bahadur Shah as a drunk, a wastrel, and most forgivingly as a coward.
And this history in which he has been so condemned, who wrote that history? The history was written by his murderers. So can such a history be without bias?
So when I designed the cover of this book, I wanted it to declare that in this mirror of the past, in this Mirate Bahaduri, this book should not distort history. Yes, the image of Bahadur is virtual and therefore laterally displaced, but it is not the distorted narrative of hate. It is not the crow of the conqueror.
Now, if you want to know about somebody, where do you begin? History, when it talks of Bahadur, speaks only about his death. The entire narrative is how to justify his murder. What about his life? His life is usually dismissed in one contemptuous line, Avara tha. It's not enough. The injustice of that riled me. Even the most dastardly criminal deserves a hearing. And do you know that Bahadur was just 30 years old when he was murdered? He had at that time been a king for 10 years. So surely his brief and crowded life of those 10 years deserved some notice. So I just wanted to know this young man better. But I had only one signpost in history to start with, his death. So I had to go into reverse gear, and we decided to visit the crime scene or the scene of Bahadur's murder. We decided to go to Diu.
The island of Diu where he was murdered. So Diu, it is a tiny, tiny ink dot, tiny spot. If you look at the map, you see Gujarat, and Gujarat looks like it has a big chin, and forgotten at the tip of the chin is a dot, and that dot is Diu. But that dot is the most important part of this story. And if you encounter Diu, it has many names. They call it Dweep, they call it Divya, they call it Dwip, they call it Dev Diu, they call it Diu, Dio, Div. But call it what you want, you have to acknowledge that this tiny dot is actually, in historical context, bigger than the mainland. And it conjures up ships out of nothingness.
This book is set in the 16th century. And in the 16th century, Diu became the landing stage for the great trade routes which came from the south of the subcontinent, from China, and which led to Europe and to Arabia and to Europe. Now, this trade is at the heart of the story of the 16th century. When I reached Diu, when I say I mean both of us, because we write with one voice. So when he says I, he means me too, just so that you know that.
And when she says I'm also included.
I said that first. Well, when we reached Diu, the first...
And we do surgery together, so that voice has become, over the last 40 years, a singular voice. Because from across the table with the patient in between also we are conversing, and then we take those conversations into our books.
But there is one thing I do not do with him, and which is the photographs that you see on the slideshow are all Ishrat's work. And it is through the photographs that we invite you to enter the 16th century, so that you can read the book later with greater pleasure. So, the first view of Diu is all ocean. And then I noticed the picture, next one. Now, you can look at Diu there. All ocean. Then you can see a medieval fort bulging out. And then you can see a lighthouse. Now these three things appear to be from different time frames, right? The ocean is eternal. The fort, I can date for the fort, 1535, medieval India. And the lighthouse is modern. It looks very modern. But that's not true.
The name Div, comes from what this tiny island has always been through time. It has been called Div Dandi, a light post or lighthouse. And it has been maintained to guide mariners at sea. And a Div Dandi excavated at Mul Dwarka in nearby Kodinar dates to 2000 BCE. The island is fringed by a very peculiar tree. It is a two-headed palm. Locally, it is known as the hoka. On the subcontinent, it grows only in dew, only on that one island. But it is originally the African duum palm, and it is a native of the Nile. Two heads supported by a single trunk. It's this two-headed palm, to me, seemed to represent the man I was trying to find, Bahadur. And this allowed me to enter Bahadur's story. So an island, a tree, led me to this man. You hold it to your face. No. That's all. Yeah. No, you can't.
Okay. Okay, while we're waiting for the mic, I want to draw your attention to the tree behind us. You can see the tar tree. Yeah? Now that's,
The cousin of this tree.
yes, this is just an ordinary palm that you can see. Now supposing this palm, one tree had two heads.
If these become two heads, it may become the hoka.
That is the hook.
So it is very strange that we are telling you about a palm tree which lives outside the Nile Valley, only in dew, and where Gauri has set up our podium, behind that there is a cousin of the hoka.
So I think Gauri has already read the book, or she wouldn't have chosen this place. It was the first thing we noticed was that. It's brilliant. Can you hear me now? Yeah? Okay. So how do we enter the story? We enter through the fort. There you can see us walking in through the fort. And the fort was so silent. And the only thing in that silence which I could hear through that silence was the jeering laughter of Portuguese historians. They describe a moment when Bahadur was drunk and went into that fort, which is a Portuguese fort, in the middle of the night. But I, in the middle of the day, as I retraced Bahadur's steps through the empty spaces of the fort, I could feel his pain and bewilderment. And I asked the question, what had happened to this young man that pushed him to such despair? Why should a sultan of a huge and prosperous kingdom be reduced to the point of going drunk into the enemy's fort? What had happened to him? That's for you. Next.
As I stood in the roofless chapel of Santiago, the ocean glittered like a Kashmiri sapphire through the rock-framed window. Across its crenellations moved a small boat, a ghurab. It was 4 p.m. in the afternoon, exactly the hour when Bahadur had set out on his fatal journey. It was 30 minutes to murder. Actually, 30 minutes to murder could be the title of our new book. Had he been expecting danger? What were his thoughts before the moment of his ambush?
And now I'm going to read a little section from the book about that moment of ambush. Too late, he remembers the battlefield is no place for relief, not even to a drowning man. He hears the enemy exclaim his name, Sultan, Bahadur, Al Rai.
A man leans out towards him, holding out an oar.
All he has to do is to grasp it. All he has to do. But even that is too slow, too difficult. There, he has it almost.
As a hand reaches down into the water and tugs at his waist, for one moment, through unbearable anguish, he feels the tug of hope. But as something gives, he understands. It was not hope but greed that tugged him briefly towards life.
There, they have the gold dagger from his waist. They will let go now. There is nothing more left to steal.
They let go. He is free. His arms flail out as he sinks. A spume of red bubbles is erased by the next wave of the sea.
The waters closed immediately over Bahadur's murder, wiping out all the evidence.
The next morning, I set out to retrace Bahadur's last day, beginning at dawn. On the horizon, bobbed a solitary ship. Perhaps the very caravel where the treacherous governor, Nuno da Cunha, lay with murder in his heart, pretending to be ill. What had happened through that eventful day?
Between the victim and his murderer were interposed the people of Tube. Who were they? They walked past me all morning, trailing stories, speaking of a time 500 years ago, and yet of today, and perhaps of tomorrow. I met them, but I hadn't yet glimpsed Bahadur. There.
As I walked past a neglected doorway, I was stopped by a scent that teleported me to Bahadur's own time. It was the perfume of roses, intense and heavy, a perfume that must have wafted out to the sea from the rose gardens of Malikayas, who made Dew's Ithr the most coveted in the world. The roses I inhaled were intoxicating but not soporific. The scent was ethereal and luminous and alerted me to a tendril of a perfume that whispered past the roses, and that was Tulsi. Roses and Tulsi is the essence of dew. I followed the scent to its source, and I knew that I had arrived at Bahadur's retreat. Through his troubled reign, year after year, Bahadur would thunder to dew on his horse Bark for sanctuary. Where else could he have come to but here to this small dargah? To a stone bench surrounded by roses and tulsi and fans of the hoka above it.
I was not wrong. This dargah has been in the unbroken stewardship of one family for 600 years. Roses and tulsi, the essence of dew, and the hoka, which by now had become my symbol for Bahadur, they began to speak his story.
I had seen the island, I had heard its story, but I hadn't yet met the man. And here he came, Bahadur in the flesh, except he was riding a scooter instead of a horse. Young, exuberant, a boy in the crowd, and he could rely to see them across. The merry group posed for me, then waved, and then vanished into the past. Or was it into the future?
I returned to the beach. And there, the next one. He's going the wrong way.
Yeah.
No, the last one with the horse. Yes, that one. I returned to the beach, and there I watched Bahadur wading his horse through the shallows, through the shore. And then I went home to
And
write his
started
story.
writing this book.
I want to say something here about Bahadur, who lived in the 16th century, which is why we have that photograph of Bahadur riding the scooter with the entire family behind him. Because when you read his story in this book, you will not be meeting a man from the 16th century. You will be meeting a teenager of India today. And why is that?
He's 19 years old.
But tell them the background so that they know. So the point of the Indian teenager today, who is torn between what society tells him or her to do and what the internal inspiration forces her or him to think, is the same dilemma that Bahadur faced. Bahadur's mother was a Rajput princess. His father was a Sultan of Gujarat. His closest friend was a Pandit. So in his
And
reign...
his best friend was his horse.
And his best friend was his horse. Bahadur was illiterate. He couldn't learn to read or write. And yet, the most interesting person in his life was, to him, a great scholar of his times, a great authority on poetry and literature, the Mughal Humayun. They never met, but through 10 years of his reign, they were constantly writing to each other through an interpreter for Bahadur and facing each other on the battlefield. So, Ishrat, how do you think today's people would react to Bahadur, to his situation and to his dilemma?
To how they would react to Bahadur, I would like to bring a point to the two of you. Like, supposing you came up to me and you gave me a choice and you told me there are these two young men. One is illiterate. He cannot read a line. The other one is most literate. He has the biggest library in India. Probably in the world at that time. He's suave. He's well-mannered. Who would you think would impress me? A man who is a surgeon? A man who likes words, who likes to read, who likes to write? Whom do you think would impress him? Everyone would think that it would be Humayun. But no. Unknown to both of us, we both stumbled onto Bahadur, this illiterate 19-year-old, and we both fell in love with him.
Because Bahadur has the thing which can only be described by the word Josh.
Yes.
Out of anything, out of nothing, he would snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. A little like MS Dhoni in the 16th century, you'd say?
Exactly. Yes. Yeah.
So you can lose a battle,
But you can,
win the war.
yeah. So we'd like to hear from you, like if we have interested you in learning more about Bahadur.
I have a question. So, what made two medical professionals, two surgeons, get into history and the writing part of things?
May I?
And also such beautiful photography as well.
I will leave the photography part for him to answer. But for the main part of the question, we have been writing together for almost 25 years now. And as doctors, we are deeply interested in the changes of environment which cause the emergence of disease. So most of our non-fiction so far has been based on the major diseases of India and how what we are doing to the country today is causing these diseases to become more dangerous and life-threatening. Now, this is not our first historical novel, historical non-fiction. We have also written a history of the Bombay plague earlier, called Room 000, which was researched from the stories of the sufferers, the victims of plague, and the stories of the Indians who researched the germ and gave rise to the management and prevention of death in that epidemic. We entered the story of Bahadur actually by seeing the dilemma of young people today. And we find that hope rests entirely in the hands of today's teenagers. And we thought that this teenager who has been dismissed as a useless person has done so many wonderful things. And the same is true of every young Indian today. And we just wanted to tell that story.
And from my aspect, like she said, I'll talk about the photography. So when I was in school, I used to paint. But when I started becoming a surgeon, there was no time left to paint. So I took up the camera because it was easier. I could document the cases I was doing, and I started taking photographs. So that became like second nature to me. But as we were becoming surgeons, we were looking at patients, we were seeing, we were not just learning medicine, we were also interested in learning how medicine got to that point. So we were interested in medical history too. And we often found that in the history of medicine also, the people missing was us. That's why we started researching history of medicine, history of the plague. And of course, like you hear of Waldemar Hafkin, you hear about Anton Ghon, you hear about Robert Cox. You don't hear about Dr. Nasserwanji Adil. You don't hear about Dr. Surveyor. You don't hear about Dr. Choksi. But these are the heroes who got us away from the plague, who saved us from disease. But their stories are wiped away because some white skinned person writes the history, erases us. We are missing from these stories. So we started writing back to put ourselves back into the histories as it should be. And as we examined other histories, because when you read and you start researching, you want to open one page, but to arrive at a truth, you have to open 5,000 pages. So the more you learn, the more we find that hum hi nahi hai apni kahani mein. So we have to put ourselves back into our story.
You know, if
and
you
we have
pick
to
up,
start re-examining everything that is written. हर चीज को पढ़ना पड़ता है. हर चीज को पढ़ो, जहां देखो हम ही नहीं है, हम ही गायब हैं. हमारी कहानी निकाल दी गई है और किसी और की कहानी वो हमको किस तरह देखते हैं, वो हमको किस तरह पढ़ते हैं, वो लिखा जा रहा है. So
if you
we
pick
have
up,
to do a corrective to that narrative. We have to put ourselves back into our own stories. And that is what Kalpana and I have been trying to do. And we try to do it through medicine. So we wrote a history of the plague. We wrote a history of the Zika virus. We wrote a history of even COVID.
see, when you open a medical textbook, suppose you're a medical student, you're learning medicine, okay? Open a medical textbook, say on any disease. Let me give you the example of cholera. You will find in the first chapter that cholera had 7 pandemics. And they will tell you how many people died in London, how many people died in Belgrade, how many people died in New York.
Paris.
All these things are in Paris. 300 people, 500 people, 600 people, numbers of this sort. Not a line tells you during the same space of time, 23 million people died in India.
And
कोई नहीं बताएगा वो, है नहीं टेक्स्ट बुक में. और हम कौन है? We are sitting in India. So do we not deserve to know what happened in this ground?
the only time that I came across a diminishment in the Indian population, in the numbers, since the time they started recording numbers, was in the 1920s. What happened before 1920? The First World War and the first pandemic of flu. In that influenza pandemic, 23 million Indians died. That was the only time in the 20s that the Indian population had diminished and not increased. But in the world historical record, that doesn't matter. But a person dying in England is more important than a person dying in Gujarat. A person dying in Paris, oh, they showed the front page of the Paris newspapers showed the god of death with his scythe cutting down young people. और हमारे young, old, बच्चे, बूढ़े सब मर रहे हैं. It doesn't really matter.
And to show the opposite side, the converse of what he is saying, now all of you know modern medicine, many miracles can save many diseases through antibiotics, through drugs, but do you know that the research for all this was not done in Europe or America or Geneva? It was done in the city of Bombay in the 19th century, where yes, you had experts from all over the world coming here. Why? To study how people were dying of that disease. It became a laboratory of death, a laboratory of cure. This happened here. Even we, as we were being educated in the same college where all this had happened, even we were not taught about it. So what is history? Whose history is it? Who is telling it? What will you tell your children? What will you understand of the times in which you are living now? You are making history. I think that's important
And
for all of us to understand.
We are making history.
Yes.
Because history is not something which is confined in the hardcovers of a book. History is a living, breathing organism. We contribute to it with everything we do. We are doing it right now.
I have something to add to what Ishrat says, because he's not going to say this. I'm going to say this. This is a book festival. So a book is great, is much more than the story. An object of beauty. And every page tells its story, not only from the idea it conveys through the words, but also from the idea it conveys from the appearance of the words, from the font, from the design of the book. And all this has been done by Ishrat. So this book has been designed by him on every aspect of the page. So when you open the book, even before you read, when your eyes follow the font, because the book has different voices, each font has got a different voice. And it is as much an object of beauty from its appearance as it is, as I'm sure you will agree when you read it, from the story it contains.
And the importance of history. Thank you, Kalpana, for that compliment. But the importance of history. This morning, this is my first visit to Lucknow. It's a beautiful city. Kalpana has been here before. When she was a student, she was awarded the highest prize in surgery in this city. So, and she's very modest, so she says, आगे बढ़ो. तो मैं आगे बढ़ रहा हूँ ये बताने के बाद. But this morning, Kalpana and I, we went to Husainabad, to Aminabad, to see a little bit of Lucknow. And everywhere we went, we saw these beautiful flowers of a plant that we all know as bougainvillea. Okay, everyone is aware of bougainvillea, right? The colors of the bougainvillea flowers in Lucknow that we saw today are so intense. The orange is so intense. The pink is like the cover of my book. The white is dazzling white. The yellow is, the red is like blood. The yellow is like a streak of light at sunrise and at sunset. But the flowers of bougainvillea that you see are actually not flowers at all. जो color हमें दिखाई देता है वो फूल नहीं है. क्योंकि if you look at the flower very carefully, in the middle of the yellow, green, yellow, white, red, pink, you will see one tiny white flower. That is the actual flower. But to attract pollinators, the bees and the insects, what nature has done, it has modified the leaves next to the flower into bracts. These are called bracts in botany, which change color so that they can attract a pollinator. All right? So the flower of bougainvillea is not a flower. What you conceive and I conceive as a flower is actually not a flower. That's how the name of bougainvillea should not be that name. And why I'm telling you this is because bougainville, if you look carefully and if you think carefully, is actually a French name. So all over the world today we see bougainvillea, and it actually honors a French admiral, Louis Bougainville, who in the 1800s circumnavigated the globe. Okay? But on his ship, the Etiole, there was a naturalist who had gone on board with him. His name was Philippot Commensal. His name is remembered, but he was in love with a girl whose name was Jean Barré. Jean Barré women were not allowed on board the ship. So what she did was, she was a botanist. She disguised herself as a man and signed on to be on that ship. So she is the first girl who is supposed to have traveled across the globe. पता नहीं उससे पहले कितने Indians, Chinese, Indonesians, Filipinos, कितनों ने travel किया, but उनका नाम किसी को नहीं पता. पता है? So when they reached Brazil, when they reached the Amazon basin, someone fell ill on board the ship. Now this girl, dressed as a boy, she went ashore. She went around and looked and she found Jadi Booty and she healed this person, but as a man, right? And there she found these flowers. All right? She brought them back to the ship, but her boyfriend, Philippot, he named them as Bougainvillea to honor the owner of the ship. All right. So they brought back these plants to Paris and it was touted as Bougainvillea, Bougainvillea glabra, because if you look at the flowers, they look paperous. They look like paper. So glabra is Greek for paper. कागज के फूल कहते हैं उसको उर्दू में. So now I'm trying to tell you is that these flowers actually belonged to the tribe of Amazonians called the Tupi tribe. उस tribe के आज 4-5 लोग बचे हुए हैं. No one has asked them what they called this flower. ना वो tribe रही, ना उनका नाम रहा, और ये जो गोरा वहां गया था, French guy, who had nothing to do with the flowers, उसका नाम जो है पूरी दुनिया में आज घूम रहा है. तो मेरा कहना ये है कि we have to cut all this nonsense out and get the true name of that flower. अब मैं कहाँ जाऊँ, उस किस टूपी से मैं पूछूं कि उसका नाम क्या है, because जो 4 बचे हैं वो भी उसको बोगनविलिया कहते हैं. तो कहाँ गया सच?
नहीं. So to return.
कहाँ गया नाम?
To return to the history that you have put into this. How do you restore Bahadur to his true place?
So we have made an
attempt in the Indian narrative.
So we have made an attempt to make Bahadur relevant to today.
So just as
इसकी कहानी में हमारी कहानी है.
और ये आपकी भी कहानी है.
हमारी means हमारी.
So please read it.
Any question? Yes,
So,
God.
sir, could you please enlighten us about the common pen name that we've selected? Because Kalpish say I can make out that it is Kalpana ma'am and Ishrat sir's common name
See, it is a little...
meshed together.
Yes, it is meshed together, Kalpana and Ishrat. But there is another dimension to it. It has... Kalpana in Sanskrit, as you know, means imagination. Ishrat in Persian means pleasure. So Kalpish Ratna is the pleasures of imagination. So that's the reason why I put it together.
Thank you so much, sir. And ma'am, for your unique touch. I think this is the first time that we've received a book release with such creativity that you'd organize it with the pictures as well as the script. So we thank you, and we have a small token of appreciation that I would like Amit sir to please come on the dais and please present to our esteemed speakers.
Thank you.
Thank you for being such a lovely audience and giving us such a patient hearing.